You know how in every friend group there's the planner, the chaos gremlin, the deep feeler, and the chill, it's fine one? Today we're talking about an old school framework that actually explains a lot of that, the four temperaments. Before we had words like trauma informed, before we had the DSM, CBT, attachment theory, all of that, humans were still asking the same question. Why am I like this? And why are you like that? If you go all the way back about 2,400 years, ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates started talking about something called the four humors. They believed our physical and emotional states were shaped by four body fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. From those humors, they came up with four basic temperaments: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic. Now, modern medicine has completely rejected the idea that body fluids cause personality. That part is outdated and definitely not scientific. But the pattern spotting they were doing, the idea that some people run hot and intense, some are slow and steady, some are bubbly and social, some are deep and reflective, those observations never really went away. Over the centuries, philosophers and early psychologists started playing with similar ideas and connected them to traits like introversion, emotionality, and what we now call personality traits. Even modern personality models that use things like the Big Five traits were influenced by those early attempts to map out human temperament. So even though nobody serious today is saying you're sad because your black bile is off, the four temperaments live on as a metaphor, a shorthand for temperament and personality differences. And that's what we're playing with in this episode. Not medical facts, but a simple framework that can still help you understand your patterns in relationships, emotional regulation, and even recovery. In a second, I'm going to tell you a little story, a vignette per se, to help you see these four temperaments in action. And as you're listening, I want you to notice which one feels uncomfortably familiar. Picture this. You and three friends are planning a weekend away. Friend one is in the group chat like, oh my God, yes, this is going to be so fun. We should do a picnic and go thrift shopping and find a cute coffee shop and maybe a concert. Wait, do they have karaoke? They're sending memes, TikToks, playlists. That's our sanguine energy. Friend two steps in and goes, okay, listen, I made a spreadsheet. Here are three Airbnbs under budget. If we leave by 8 a.m., we miss traffic. I signed who's driving and who's going to bring snacks. That's our choleric, efficient, decisive, low tolerance for chaos. Friend three is quieter in the chat, but when you talk one on one, they've already checked the reviews, the weather, the potential safety issues, and how much gas will cost. And they're stressing about whether everyone will actually have a good time or not. That's our melancholic, thoughtful, careful, emotionally tuned in, sometimes anxious. Friend four just keeps saying, I'm good with whatever, I'm just happy to go. They're the ones smoothing out tension, saying, it's not a big deal, don't fight about it. That's our phlegmatic, calm, steady peacekeeping. Same trip, same plan, but four totally different nervous systems. Four different ways of regulating stress, four different ways of showing love and anxiety. That's what we're unpacking today. In this episode, I want to walk you through each temperament, how it tends to show up in mental health, in relationships, and in coping strategies, especially around big emotions and recovery. I want you to gently notice with compassion where you see yourself in these patterns. All right, so before we get to the disclaimers and the mental health side of this, I want to nerd out for a minute on where this whole four temperaments idea actually came from. The version most people know goes back to a Roman physician named Galen, who lived around 129 to 201 CE. He built on earlier Greek ideas from Hippocrates and others who believed everything in the world was made of four basic elements: earth, air, fire, and water. They thought those four elements in nature showed up in the body as four humors, four fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. The thinking went like this. Each humor was linked to certain qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry. Those humors were supposed to affect how our bodies worked and how we felt and behaved. If your humors were balanced, you were healthy in body and mind. If one humor got out of balance, that would supposedly cause both physical illness and emotional or behavioral problems. So, in this framework, too much blood was linked to the sanguine temperament, warm hearted, cheerful, optimistic, confident. Too much yellow bile was choleric, fiery, energetic, passionate. Too much black bile was melancholic, sad, fearful, depressed, but also poetic and artistic. Too much phlegm was phlegmatic, slow, quiet, shy, rational, and consistent. Galen believes some people were born with a predisposition toward one temperament, but that a lot of emotional and behavioral problems came from an imbalance of the humors. So treatments at the time focused on things like diet, exercise, purging or bloodletting, basically trying to restore balance to the fluids to fix both the body and the mind. We now know that part is wrong. Modern medicine has completely rejected the idea that your personality comes from having too much blood or bile. Humorism as a medical model has been discarded. But what's wild is that pieces of this very old idea stuck around and fed into modern psychology. For centuries, doctors and philosophers kept noticing the same patterns. Some people are more changeable and emotional, some are more calm and reserved. For centuries, doctors and philosophers kept noticing the same patterns. People are more changeable and emotional, and some are more calm and reserved. In the late 1800s, psychologists like Wilhelm Wundt started talking about temperament in terms of changeability and emotionality. Then in 1947, Hans Eysenck came along and said, hey, personality seems to sit on two big dimensions, extroversion and neuroticism. And he even noted that those traits echo the ancient temperaments. So no one is out here seriously practicing bloodletting to cure anxiety anymore, thank God. But Galen's basic observation that people differ in stable ways and that those differences show up in both body and behavior became one of the philosophical roots of modern personality research and some modern therapies. I like to think of it this way. The science behind the four temperaments is outdated. The questions they were trying to answer are the same ones we're still wrestling with in psychology today. Why do some of us run hot and intense while others are calm and slow to react? Why do some of us default to joy and others default to worry or sadness? And how do those inborn tendencies interact with trauma, environment, and choice? That's the thread we're pulling on in this episode. We're not using Galen as a medical manual. We're using this old framework as a language to talk about nervous system patterns, emotional regulation, and how we show up in relationships now. All right, with that little history detour out of the way, let me do my usual housekeeping and disclaimers of Hi, I'm Jamie. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in Christian counseling of substance abuse and addictive disorders. I completed my internship at Arizona State Prison, and I was a licensed addiction counselor for a few years. Then I had a midlife crisis and realized I wasn't what I wanted to be when I grew up, so I quit my job to write full time. And now, here I am, on the internet, talking to you. I am no longer a licensed addiction counselor, and even if I was, I still couldn't be your counselor because I'm just some random person on the internet. Nothing in this podcast is a substitute for therapy, diagnosis, or professional treatment. It's for education, reflection, and sharing my personal experiences. If you find yourself in crisis, or if you're thinking about hurting yourself, or if you feel like you might relapse and you're scared or overwhelmed, please reach out for real-time help. If you're in the United States, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide Crisis Lifeline and talk to someone 24/7. If you're outside of the US, check your local emergency numbers or mental health crisis lines and use what's available where you live. You deserve support that's about you in real time, not just a podcast episode. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's dive in to today's discussion. So now we're going to talk about the spark, which is sanguine. Sanguine is the fun friend. The hype human, the person who turns a trip to Target into a full blown adventure. They're usually energetic and talkative and quick to say yes to plans. The first to start a group chat or hype everyone up. But here's the flip side, they can struggle with follow through and consistency. This is the friend who's excited about everything, signs up for 3 new hobbies a month, and then forgets half of them exist by week 3. Think about that one friend who says, let's start a podcast, a book club, and a small business all in the same week. They design the Canva logo, make the group chat, and then when it's time to do the boring back end stuff, they're mysteriously so overwhelmed and disappear. Emotionally, a sanguine person might joke through discomfort, change the subject when things get heavy, fill the silence so they don't have to feel what's underneath when they're dysregulated, and they might reach for distractions, scrolling, talking nonstop, making new plans, anything but sitting with their feelings. You can think of sanguine energy as high octane social fuel. The nervous system is often wired to seek stimulation and positive emotion. So the work isn't to shame that, but to give some structure. If this is you, you're not too much or flaky. Your brain just loves stimulation. The work is learning how to build tiny bits of structure into your very big energy so your spark doesn't burn you out. Regulation tools that tend to work well for the sanguine types are movement, like walks, dancing, cleaning with music on, social support, voice notes to our friends, support groups, meetings, micro commitments. I'll do 10 minutes instead of overhaul my whole life today, and even fun accountability, like body doubling, challenges, co working sessions, check ins, things that feel playful rather than rigid. The choleric is the driver, the boss, the energy, the if no one else will do it, I will person. They're often direct, confident, and decisive, good at taking charge in a crisis, the one everyone low key expects to just handle it. The flip side, they can come off as controlling, intimidating, or even emotionally unavailable, even if they care deeply. This is the friend who's planning the road trip, booking the Airbnb, assigning who brings what, and then getting mad when nobody sticks to the plan. You're in a group trying to decide where to eat. Everyone's like, I don't care, whatever. The choleric friend finally snaps. Okay, we're going here at 7. I made the reservations. If you're late, that's on you. They weren't trying to be mean. They just got tired of everyone else's indecision. Emotionally, a choleric person might go straight to problem solving instead of comfort, shut down when they feel vulnerable, show anger when what's underneath is fear or hurt. Under stress, they often try to control more plans, people, outcomes, because control feels safer than admitting, I'm scared or I feel powerless. In modern psychology terms, you can think of this as a mix of drive, extroversion, and emotional intensity. That can be an incredible gift in leadership and advocacy, but it can also burn relationships if it's not regulated. If this is you, you're not a villain, you're just wired for action. The work is learning to pause before reacting, ask questions, and let people in on what you're actually feeling, not just what you're doing. Regulation tools that tend to work for the choleric types are things like the one breath pause, one slow inhale, one slow exhale, then responding, clarifying questions. What's the actual problem I'm trying to solve right now? And consent based leadership, checking in. Are you okay with me taking the lead on this? Reframing help seeking as strategy, therapy and support as optimizing performance instead of something's wrong with me. And then we have the melancholic, the deep diver. Melancholic is the deep feeler, the thoughtful one, the person who picks up on every tiny shift in tone and mood. They tend to be reflective, sensitive, and loyal, detail oriented, and careful. The one who remembers your birthday, your trauma, and your coffee order. The flip side is overthinking perfectionism and pessimism. This is the friend who rewrites a text 5 times, worried they overshared, then apologizes for being too much when they were just being human. Imagine someone sends a message in the group chat and nobody responds for 30 minutes. Most people think everyone's busy. The melancholic brain goes, they hate me. I said too much. I should have left the chat. I ruin everything. Emotionally, a melancholic person might internalize everything as my fault. struggle to let go of past mistakes, feel deeply, but have trouble expressing it without feeling dramatic. Under stress, they might isolate, ruminate, or numb out because the feelings are so heavy and so constant that it's exhausting. In modern terms, this can look like high emotional sensitivity combined with conscientiousness. The upside is deep empathy and carefulness. The downside is anxiety, depression, and analysis paralysis if there's no support. If this is you, you're not too sensitive. You're tuned in. The work is learning to reality check your thoughts, practice good enough instead of perfect, and let yourself be supported instead of suffering in silence. Regulation tools that tend to work for melancholic types are things like journaling. Get your thoughts out of your head and onto paper. Cognitive tools like asking yourself, what is the evidence for this story I'm telling myself? And creative outlets like art, music, writing, or anything that safely channels depth and gentle structure. Routines that reduce decision fatigue and overthinking. Then we have phlegmatic. Phlegmatic is the anchor, the calm one, the steady one, the it's okay, don't worry about it energy. They are often easygoing and adaptable. They're good listeners, and they can be the glue in the friendship groups and families. The flip side is they can avoid conflict, minimize their own needs, and slip into passivity. This is the friend who always says, I'm fine, whatever you want, even when they're absolutely not fine. You're deciding on weekend plans. Everyone's throwing out ideas. The phlegmatic person genuinely does have a preference. They're tired. They want a chill night in. But what they actually say is, I don't care, whatever you guys want, because they don't want to rock the boat. Emotionally, a phlegmatic person might bottle things up until they quietly shut down. Avoid hard conversations for months or years. Numb out with routines, games, scrolling, or sleep. Under stress, instead of exploding, they disappear emotionally or physically. They're just less present, harder to reach. And everyone says they're so chill without noticing they're actually checked out. In temperament language, this can look like low emotional volatility and high agreeableness. It's soothing to be around, but internally, there can be a lot of swallowed frustration and grief. If this was you, you're not weak or lazy. Your nervous system just really values peace. The work is learning that boundaries and honest communication actually protect your peace, not destroy it. Regulation tools that tend to work for phlegmatic types are things like low intensity grounding, gentle stretching, breathing, slow walks, and even scripts for boundaries like I'd prefer to, or I'm just not up for that tonight. Schedule check-ins with safe people so that you don't drift too far inward or self-isolate. And then breaking hard conversations into smaller pieces instead of all or nothing blow-ups. Now, Jamie, why does this still matter today? Well, I know that's what you're thinking. The original humorous theory, this idea that body fluids cause personality, is medically wrong. I'm not a doctor, but it's medically wrong, obviously, because it's very outdated, right? And this is before we have the technology that we have today. And most people know that's not how the body or the brain works. Our body fluid isn't going to dictate our personality. But at the time, it made sense, okay? At the time, it made sense. Modern psychology uses more complex, evidence-based models to study personality and temperament. But the observation that there are recurring temperament patterns, that part has shown up over and over again in research. We just use different language for it now. Traits like emotionality, extroversion, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and so on. The reason the four temperaments won't die is because they're simple. They give us language, and having language matters. When you can say, oh, that's my choleric coming out, or my melancholic brain is spiraling right now, you create a little bit of space between you and your reaction. Now, I guarantee you that if you go out and you say, that's my choleric brain, that's my melancholic brain, people are going to be like, did you switch timelines? Like, what is going on here? Because who even uses those words anymore, right? So for fun, go out and try it. Just see what people say. Okay? You don't have to, but I'm going to. I'm going to try it and see what happens. Needless to say, you create a little bit of space between you and your reaction when you're able to label the emotion. And that space is where your emotional regulation is going to live. So even if the origins are outdated and the practical use doesn't make sense now like it did then, the theory behind personality patterns is very current because it does help you understand your triggers. It helps you understand how you can choose regulation tools that fit your wiring. It helps you depersonalize conflict in relationships. It lets you hold compassion for the parts of you that developed as survival strategies. And your temperament is not an excuse for harmful behavior. It's just a lens, a starting point, a way to say, okay, if this is how I'm wired, how can I work with my nervous system instead of constantly fighting it? Before we close, I want to zoom out for a minute and answer the question. If this four temperament stuff is technically outdated, why does it still feel so true? The original theory, the whole four body fluids thing from ancient Greek and Roman medicine, is not how modern psychology or medicine explains personality anymore. It was a proto-psychology attempt to map patterns people were noticing without the science that we have now. But here's what is still relevant. First, they were right that people come into the world with different temperaments, different default settings, if you want to think of it like that way. And those default settings are in emotionality, activity level, sociability. Modern temperament research still talks about core traits like negative emotionality, activity, sociability that showed up early in life, and they stay fairly stable over time. Second, over time, those inborn tendencies interact with your family, culture, trauma, and choices to shape your adult personality. When certain temperamental traits are extreme or get reinforced in unhealthy environments, they can contribute to rigid patterns or even personality disorders. Third, the four temperament idea helped pave a way for later personality models. In the 1900s, psychologist Hans Eysenck explicitly mapped out the four temperaments onto two dimensions, extroversion and neuroticism, and that work influenced the development of the Big Five model that dominates personality research today. So there's a direct thread from sanguine and melancholic to the trait languages we use in modern studies. Today, researchers usually talk about traits like extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness instead of sanguine, choleric, melancholic. But if you squint, you can still see the family resemblance. Sanguine overlaps with a lot of high extroversion and sociability. Choleric overlaps with high extroversion, dominance, and emotional intensity. Melancholic overlaps with higher negative emotionality and conscientiousness, and phlegmatic overlaps with calm, low reactivity, and high agreeableness. So no, the four temperaments are not a scientifically precise model. But yes, they still give us a simple language for things modern psychology absolutely recognizes. And that is our emotional wiring is partly inborn, that it shapes how we handle stress, work, and relationships, and that extreme or unsupported temperamental traits can increase vulnerability to certain mental health struggles. Nature versus nurture. I love to talk about nature versus nurture. So, for everyday life, that is what matters. You don't need to remember every research term or model. You just need enough language to say things like, my system runs hot, so I need tools that help me pause before I explode. My system runs deep, so I need tools that help me not drown in my thoughts. My system runs social, so I need connection-based coping, not just solo willpower. My system runs avoidant, so I need gentle ways to speak up and be seen. Ancient frameworks can be wrong in the details and still be useful as mirrors of our personality. This one is a mirror. It's not a diagnosis. It's a starting point to understand how your nervous system learned to survive and how you might want to care for it now in the present. So, after all of this, ancient Greek doctors and their body fluids, early psychologists tweaking the theory, modern trait research, and then all of these real world examples, I want to bring it back to you. You might recognize yourself as identifying with mostly sanguine or choleric or melancholic or phlegmatic. You might see a blend. You might see one shows up at work, another in parenting, another in relationships. But the point of all of this is not to lock yourself into a box or get yourself attached to a label. The point is to say, if this is how I'm wired, what does my nervous system need? What kind of regulation, boundaries, and relationships actually fit me? So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were just a listener today, not you with your story, your defenses, your labels, but just a human in the audience, which temperament felt the most like home to you? And how has that wiring shaped the way you deal with stress, love, and your own healing journey? If this episode got you thinking, I'd love to hear from you. You can journal about which temperament fits you and how it shows up in your life if you want. Journaling is something that I just started in 2026. And for myself personally, it has been a game changer. You don't have to. You can use voice notes or something instead if you want. But journaling is changing my life. I highly encourage you to share this episode with someone in your life and ask them which one they think they are. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, whatever it is. Or you can comment below if you're on YouTube and tell me, I'm pretty sure I'm XYZ temperament that we discussed today, and how that connects to your recovery or mental health story. And if you want more on this, let me know which temperament you want me to deep dive, or if there's another topic that you would like me to deep dive. I wanted to do something different today, other than the deep subjects that we sometimes cover. But I also want to do a little bit of historical psychology talk just because I think it's fun and it helps kind of understand how psychology is evolving with the times. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Take care of your brain, take care of your body, and I will talk to you in the next episode.